All right, so we will begin with the Teaching Legal Concepts in the CCQ program. Emily, you have the floor.
Thank you. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here today. We're really happy to meet you to talk about how to teach the legal concepts in the New Culture and Citizenship in Quebec program. So I'll start by introducing myself. So my name is Émilie Dubois. I'm a lawyer and a plain language specialist at Éducalois. So my job is to take legal concepts and make them more easy to understand for the main public. Okay. Alexandra, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, so my name is Alexandra Magazin. I'm also a lawyer and plain language specialist at Éducalois. So same job description as Émilie.
Exactly. So some of you might already know Éducalois, but for those of you who don't, I'll briefly introduce the organization. So Éducalois is a non-governmental, not-for-profit organization, and our mission is to explain the law and people's rights and responsibilities in a clear and easy to understand way. We also have a lot of pedagogical resources for teachers, including lesson plans, texts, quizzes, teaching guides, and much more. And we'll show you a little bit of that during the presentation. And all of these contents are there to help you teach these very important topics to your students. So I will ask you to participate a little bit in the chat. If you are teaching CCQs this year, you can react with an heart emoji in the chat so that we know if you're teaching it right now, and if not, and you're just curious, that's okay also. So I can see we have teachers in the chat who are teaching it this year. So today we are here to support you in your preparation to teaching legal concepts in the program. So it's really normal for you to feel overwhelmed by the idea of talking about legal topics, especially if you don't have a legal background. But we're here to show you that it's still possible to do that and that it can also be fun. So we'll show you the different resources that you can use to be able to do it on your own. So today the goal is that following this workshop, you'll be able to do different things. So you will be able to establish strategies to teach the legal concepts in the CCQ program. You'll also be able to find resources to teach about these concepts, and you will know where to find and how to provide reliable legal information. So before this workshop, we sent you a link to Éducalois' video presenting the legal concepts of the CCQ program. If you haven't watched it yet, we strongly recommend you to do so if you want a more comprehensive training on the law and the legal system, or at least on the basis you'll need to teach the course. If you lost the link, no worries. The training is available on our website, legallifeskill.ca. So here's the plan of the presentation today. So my colleague Alexandra will give you information about establishing strategies to teach and exploring teaching resources. And afterwards, I will be explaining to you how to find and provide reliable legal information. And the workshop should last about an hour, maybe less, depending if you have questions then during the workshop. So Alex, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I'm seeing that we have new people who joined. So for those who just joined, letting you know that the presentation is recorded, but we will have a period at the end where you can ask your questions and we will stop the recording. So now we'll discuss some strategies to teach these legal concepts. But before anything else, I would like to hear from you. So in the chat, you could write, what are some of the strategies that you already have for teaching a topic that you either have never taught before or have little previous knowledge about? I will wait a little bit, but it's okay also if there are no. Oh, so do a little research on the topic before you have an answer. That is definitely part of it. And somebody else who said the same thing as well. Okay, great. So today we will present a three-step strategy to you, and a bit of research is definitely part of that. First, we'll talk about identifying and understanding the concepts. Second, finding reliable teaching resources. And third, being a law teacher. So the first step is to identify and understand the concepts you'll need to teach. This involves checking the program and identifying the concepts you'd like to learn more about. It also involves taking note of your previous knowledge or assumptions about these concepts. And we recommend that you do this before because you probably already have some knowledge of these concepts. So it's good practice to examine what you already know or think you know, and later compare it with what you discover. By doing this, you can really identify common misconceptions or gaps in knowledge. And with this, you'll be better prepared to teach the content to your students who may also share the same misconceptions or gaps as you did. Next, we suggest to look for clear and reliable information online. Here you could check Itzkiarua's content, websites from the government, or other trustworthy organizations as well. It is key, however, to make sure that the content applies to Quebec, because the law can be different from province to province, and we'll talk a bit about that later in the presentation. But for now, big point to remember, make sure that it applies to Quebec. Next is summarizing the concepts in your own words. This will help you elaborate the concepts and also give you the confidence to teach them. And lastly, for this first step is to map out the connections between relevant legal concepts. So once you summarize a few concepts, you can try to make links between them, and this will help you get a better understanding of how concepts interact with each other. So that was it for step one. Step two is finding reliable teaching resources. Now, you can develop your own teaching material if you have the time, if you feel inspired, but there are plenty of resources that are also available online that you could download and use. And today we're really going to talk about the second option. So this step, sorry, I keep misspeaking. So this step involves searching for relevant and reliable teaching resources. And to do that, you can use relevant keywords like the concepts of the program at Quebec, at teaching guide or lesson plan. You can also type the video, quiz, teaching material, so whatever format you want these teaching resources in. Make sure that the resource fits the program. And as we've said before, always make sure that the information applies in Quebec. And then a good practice is once you find all these reliable teaching resources to create a teaching resources folder. Also talking to your colleagues about it, exchanging resources. It doesn't have to be an isolating exercise. And finally, the third step for teaching new concepts is being a law teacher. What does it mean? How do you do this? I'll share some tips that can help you feel confident when talking about legal concepts with your students. So first is to present legal concepts in a neutral way and ask questions that stimulate critical thinking from your students. And I'm presenting both tips at the same time because while it's crucial that you assume a neutral position when talking about laws, how they work, how the legal system works, you can still propose debates or thought-provoking activities that will stimulate critical thinking. Another tip is to make connections to your students' daily lives. And this is important because the law has a reputation to be a little too abstract, to be overly complicated, but it all depends on how you present it to them. So if you can find a situation that they're facing that could be a good metaphor for a concept, definitely feel free to use it. Third tip, another really important one, is to never give legal advice. If a student asks you a legal question about a situation that either they're going through, a friend is going through, a parent is going through, you can give them information. So you can tell them this is what the law says, but you cannot give them advice. You can tell them you should take this step, or you should definitely sue this person, or I would do this if I were you. The reason for this is that legal advice is a reserved act, so only lawyers and notaries can give advice. But we'll talk a bit more about this later. And another thing you can do to a student who asks these types of questions is give referrals to resources that could help them. And we'll talk a bit about that at the end as well. Finally, to make legal topics a bit more fun, a bit more interesting, it's also a good idea to vary your teaching techniques. So with law concepts, you could propose debates, you can propose scenarios, have mock trials, quizzes, and we'll definitely show you some activities that we have in our teaching guides. So today we'll mostly cover step 2 of this strategy, which is finding reliable teaching resources. And for that, it's a bit of a self-plug-in, but we will go over some resources that Itzkelwa offers. The website that we own, other than itzkelwa.qc.ca, is legallifeskills.ca. And they gather different resources for teachers. So as you can see on the screen, it offers high school workshops, quizzes, and teaching guides, to name a few. Today, the focus is really going to be on teaching guides, as we think that they will be the most useful tool for you. And I will be presenting 2 teaching guides, one for elementary school and the other for secondary school. So the first example we have here is a teaching guide called Don't Fight, Mediate. And the title is pretty self-explanatory. It is about mediation. So let's say that you're a teacher at an elementary school, you're looking for a resource that talks about rights and freedoms. So you go on Google, you type the keywords rights and freedoms, you type culture and citizenship in Quebec, teaching guide, elementary school, and you come across our page. So the first thing you can do to consider whether it's a good resource for your context, for your class, is to skim through the description. You also have the duration here, so it says 2 periods, and you should look at the educational objectives and the activities proposed to make sure that it's a good fit for the program and for your classroom as well. So here for this teaching guide, we see the duration is 2 periods, suggested level elementary cycle 3. This is for the culture and citizenship in Quebec class, could also be for English language arts. You have the description, so students are asked to take on specific roles in a simulated mediation, and the educational objectives, so to raise awareness of the use of cooperation and dialogue, become familiar with the mediation process, and to put into practice skills like cooperation, listening skills, etc. If you scroll on the same web page, you'll also find Itzkelwa's related content and external pedagogical tools in the description. You can consult them to enrich your preparation if you want. So these links are going to be towards articles or videos that we have on our website. And like my colleague said at the beginning of the presentation, our mission, our bread and butter, is to make the law accessible, to make it clear. So if you need more context, you have questions, you could definitely turn to this legal related content. And external pedagogical tools from reliable partners as well. If you scroll down the web page even more, you find the teaching materials that you will need to lead your class in both French and English. So if we look at the English section, you'll find the teaching guide, the student workbook answer key, printable PowerPoint slides with notes, and the PowerPoint presentation. So let's say you decided that this lesson plan is a good fit to your classroom. What do you do next? Well, you can download all of these teaching materials for free and start your preparation. The preparation involves reading the teaching guide to get an overview of the in-class procedure, reading the student workbook as well to become familiar with the materials that your students will be working with, and very importantly, reading the PowerPoint and the PowerPoint notes, because that's where you'll find instructions and relevant information. after that, you're pretty much ready to go. And here's what you'll generally find in our teaching guides. So you have the presentation of the activity, you have an overview of the in-class procedure, a step-by-step description of the lesson plan, and then an optional evaluation grid for your students with an answer key. You can download the student workbook and its answer key as well. The answer key really is a mirror of the student's workbook. So as a teacher, you can simply print a copy of the answer key and you'll know what your students will see in their workbook. And again, the PowerPoint, that's where you're going to find the relevant information and the teaching instructions right here in the notes. That was for the elementary level, but we also have teaching guides for the secondary level. So if you're a teacher looking for materials for the secondary level, the process is the same as I described. So let's say you need to teach about biotechnology in secondary 4 and all the related legal topics in the program. So you searched for teaching materials on these topics and hooray, you found this teaching guide. So now, same principle, you look for the relevant information. So duration, you see it's 3 periods, suggested level, secondary cycle 2, the description. So this activity involves a class debate on 2 hot topics in biotechnology, the selection of human embryos, and the use of a baby's tissues or organs to cure another person. Students then draft a bill on these topics. So say you find this approach interesting. You continue to check if the material touches on the competencies that you want your students to develop. So you look here, pedagogical objectives and the subjects and subject-specific competencies, like reflecting on ethical questions, examining a variety of points of view. If you decide that you want to use this material, you can, again, just download the teaching materials for free and start your preparation. And let's take a quick look at the teaching materials. So this is what the teaching guide will look like. Again, you'll find the presentation of the activity, the in-class procedure, a step-by-step description of the lesson plan, and an optional evaluation grid. However, because this topic is a bit more complex, a bit more technical, we have also included a supplement of relevant information. So that will also be available in your teaching guide. Student workbook, again, you see it on the screen. It offers students the relevant information in an easy to understand way. That's also where you'll find the activity pages. And here, as the activity is to form an opinion on the subject of save your babies, and students have to propose a law to regulate this practice, we don't have an answer key because it's meant to be a more free-flowing exercise. And then again, you have the PowerPoint with the relevant notes, the relevant instructions in the notes right here. So that is an overview of the teaching guides that we have on our website on legallifeskills.ca.
So I'll continue with the next part of the presentation, which is finding and providing reliable legal information. And we'll look at tips, tricks, and strategies to help you. So we'll look at 2 different scenarios in this section. And with each scenario, we'll discuss how to overcome the challenge and we'll give you tips, tricks, and strategies, like I said, for you to be able to find solutions. So the first scenario, so here you have Natalie. So Natalie says, I have to teach about criminal responsibility and the consequences of behaviors online, but I don't know where to look for resources. So if you want, in the chat, you can share your strategies that you as a teacher would do in this situation, for everyone to see. I'll wait a little bit, and then afterwards we'll just go to the next slide and look at the tips that Itzgalwa is giving you. And it's perfectly So, perfect. So we have one comment that says to look at governmental websites, like websites from the government of Quebec and the federal government of Canada. So I'll just go to the next slide and we can look at a few tips. So in a situation where you have to prepare something which you don't have much knowledge on the content, the first thing that we would tell you would be to try to understand the legal concepts with accessible legal information content that is presented using everyday language. So one of the first options for that would be the contents by Educalois that Alexandra just showed you. And we also have our main Educalois website, which is more for the general public, but can still be a good option for you. But one of the participants also mentioned governmental websites. So if you go on the Quebec government website, for example, or a website for the housing court, you can get information on things like that. Okay. Another option afterwards, once you've deepened your understanding of the concepts, would be to map out the connections between the relevant concepts. And you can also afterwards make a list of follow-up and probing questions to help you further your research. So other sources apart from Educalois and from sources from the government of Quebec, if you use other sources, it's always good to verify first that they do apply to the province of Quebec because the law can differ from place to place. So just to give you an example in the next slide. So you have Jack and Jill that have lived together for 2 years, but they never got married. And the question we're asking you, if they separate, will either of them have any claim to the other one's property? So I'll ask you maybe if you want to answer in the chat if you think that the answer is yes or no. Okay. So the answer is it's maybe actually. So basically a legal question like that really depends on where the people live. So if Jack and Jill lived in British Columbia, then according to the law there, each person has a right to share um, to a certain share of property after 2 years of living together, even if they're not married. But that's not the case in Quebec. In Quebec, if you are not married, you don't have access to the other person's property. There will be some changes to that next year, but as of today, that is not the case. That's a good example of why you should always check what kind of law you're dealing with. If it's Quebec law or if it's the law of another province or another country. And if you look for information on a web page online that is of a source that's based in another Canadian province, then it's possible that the rules that are explained there are not applicable here. There are a few areas of law where the law applies the same across Canada. Usually it's when it's laws that are made by the federal government, then they would apply everywhere in Canada. A good example of that is the criminal code. So the criminal code applies everywhere in Canada. So if you get information about that, then there's a good chance that it applies to Quebec too. But it's always very important to verify and make sure that it's the reliable information. So in the second scenario here, you have Dominic. So his situation is that a student told him that their family just received a demand letter in the mail about an unpaid bill, and he asked him what they should do about it. Okay. So in this situation, what would you do? You can answer in the chat. Thank you. So people said I would refer the student to Educators resources or to a legal expert, or I'd say that I don't know the answer. So um, basically, in such a situation, the main thing to do is never give legal advice. So Alexandra mentioned it a little bit earlier, but it's really important not to give legal advice. The reason why, and we'll delve a little deeper in that in the next slides, but legal advice goes much further than legal information to assist a person. It's to assist a person in deciding on a course of action, which is not your role. Um, Therefore, when you give legal advice, it requires legal expertise. So it's something very important, and you don't want to give the wrong answer to the student. Beyond that, only lawyers and notaries can give legal advice in Quebec, as was mentioned by my colleague earlier. And if anyone else, apart from lawyers and notaries, does it, it's possible to get a fine between 200 and $2,500 to around $62,000, which is very high, but it has happened. So the best thing you can do with your students in such cases would be to share with them reliable resources or general information. You can refer the student to Educalois website, like someone mentioned in the chat, or you can share with them tips on how they can look themselves for information online. If you know the information yourself, you can present the information to the student, but you should not advise them on legal action, and you should not advise them on what they can do. So next, in the next section, we will look at the difference between legal information and legal advice. So legal information is basically general information. So it's giving someone, for example, information about possible outcomes in a given situation. So it's general information about the law, about the options available to a person, about the basic way that the legal system works. And it's information that you provide based on a simple reading of the law. So it's reading the law and just repeating what it says. It can be in simpler words, but it's repeating what it says to the student. Legal advice, however, is much different. So it goes deeper than plain legal information. Legal advice is when you state to someone how the law applies to their particular situation. It can also be when you recommend a particular course of action to a person, providing an opinion on the likely outcome of a particular course of action that you would refer to a student. So if you're a lawyer or a notary, you can recommend to someone, you can say, oh, I recommend you to sue a person. I recommend you to do this or that. That would be giving legal advice. Legal advice is also anything that involves the interpretation of the law. For example, the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms states that every human being whose life is in peril has a right to assistance. So if someone starts to ask you, what does life in peril mean? What about dangers of serious physical injury? If someone asks you to interpret it deeper, then it would be asking you for legal advice. So just to help you understand better, I'll give you a few more examples. Okay, so those here are two examples of legal information. So telling a person that recently purchased a home that they may have a recourse for latent defects if they have like a problem in their house. So just mentioning to them that the recourse exists is legal information. Or for example, if someone is getting divorced and you mention to them that they can apply for support payments, that it's something that exists and that it's something that is available, that is legal information. So basically, it's just saying what the law says and not going further than that. And here and you have two examples of legal advice. So in the same situation with the person who purchased the house and they have a problem in their house, if you tell them that the problem they have is what is considered a hidden defect and that they should sue the person that sold the house to them, then that is giving legal advice. And the same case for the person who is getting divorced. If you tell them that they will be able to get support payments and that they should ask for it, or if you calculate the amount of the payments for them, that is also legal advice. So here is another example, another little, but it's a question actually to test your understanding of what I've mentioned earlier. So I'll read it aloud for you. Jake, your student, tells you he was dismissed from his job last week. His boss said it was because business was slow, but then the boss hired his girlfriend to do Jake's job. Jake comes to you and asks you if he can get his job back. If you tell him, I'm not saying you should do this, but if I were in your shoes, I would file a complaint. You're sure to get your job back. So if you tell this to Jake, are you giving him legal advice or you're giving him legal information? You can put your answers in the chat. All right. So everyone said legal advice, and that was the right answer. So in the example we gave, the person, if they said this phrase, would be doing two things that constitute legal advice. So the phrasing there and the fact that they say, oh, I'm not telling you what to do, it doesn't change the fact that it's still recommending a specific course of action. The course of action there would be to file a complaint. And at the same time, it was also providing an opinion on the likely outcome by mentioning that Jake would be sure to get his job back. So what should have been done in that situation to help Jake without giving him legal advice would be to give him general information on employment law in Quebec. So, for example, you can tell Jake that workers in Quebec have some legal protections against dismissal in certain situation. You can explain the different situation as well. You can explain him the different options he has without telling him which option he should go for. For example, Jake would have the option to file a complaint with the CNESST. You cannot tell him to do it, but you can mention to him that it's an option. You can also refer him to another resources. You can refer him to the CNESST, which is the Labor Standards and Worker Health and Safety Board in Quebec. And they can give him information free of charge. So he can call them, he can go on their website as well. So those are all things that you could do in that situation to help him. So I will give the floor back to Alexandra for the end of the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Emily. So we have a couple of resources that could be helpful on the screen. And there are a lot of resources actually that you can refer your students to if they want to learn more about their legal rights and responsibilities. So we've listed some on the screen, but just note that there are many more. And if you have ideas for resources that should be added, please pass them on as well. So the first we have is the Young Bar of Montreal. It offers a free telephone consultation service for 12 to 21-year-olds that's called Let's Talk Law. So if students have legal questions about a personal situation, they can fill out a form on the Young Bar of Montreal's website, and a volunteer lawyer will call them back within a week. Priority is generally given to young people in the Montreal area, but depending on the availability of the lawyers, the service is also offered in other regions. Second resource is the Commission des Services Juridiques. They are the organization responsible for legal aid. So if you think it's relevant to have more information on legal aid, who is admissible, what kind of cases are covered, we invite you to look at their website. Lastly, Tel Jeune is a free and confidential bilingual helpline with counselors who can be reached at all times of the day and night. And counselors at Tel Jeune can suggest resources and provide information on many, many topics like bullying and violence, sexuality, work, school, etc. So you could look them up on their website or call them at 1-800-263-2266. But it'll be probably simpler if you Google it, go on their website, and the phone line is there as well. All right, so we've reached the end of the presentation. Thank you to everyone for being here and participating. We have an evaluation form that we would like you to fill out if possible. This helps us improve our workshop, better understand the needs for other workshops on legal content. And I will put it up on the screen for a little bit, but I can also answer questions. My colleague can answer questions as well if you have them. So this is the evaluation form. You can scan it or I can include the link in the chat. Oh, thank you. I see that Emily did it. And while we're at it, well, first of all, are there any questions? You can either write them in the chat or unmute yourself. I don't see any, so what I suggest that we do is also just take a very quick meander around Itzkalba's website so you can really see it in action. So can you still see my screen? No. Okay, let me share my screen again. Can you see my screen now?
No, we don't see it actually.
Oh, you don't see my screen?
No.
Okay, that's not very convenient. What about now?
Yes, right now we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So if you type legallifeskills.ca or educationjuridique.ca-en, you will land on our legal education webpage. You can click here if you're a teacher. Under teaching tools, here are all the teaching guides that we have that we've referred to throughout the presentation. So if you click here, you see that they're divided by grade level. So if you click on elementary, for example, you see that we have many more than just the Don't Fight, Mediate one that we talked about. So we have one that's called Are You Old Enough? That talks about the age at which kids, teenagers have rights, responsibilities. We talk about when they can start working. We talk about the age of criminal responsibility, so when they can be accused of a crime. Civil responsibility, when they can be held responsible for behavior that harms others. We have another teaching guide called Internet and the Law. This one focuses more on cyberbullying, the crimes that can occur on the internet. All about rules, living in your friends, a completely different reality. So this is a more historical one where we compare laws in your friends, laws today, and then Don't Fight, Mediate, which we've covered as well. I see in the chat that one of our teachers has to go. Thank you so much for being here. We hope that it was helpful, and you have the link to the website if you want to browse it further. So continuing with our exploration of this page, we have teaching guides for secondary cycle 1 as well. You'll see that some of them seem like repeats, but the content is adapted to meet the the grade level. So are you old enough comes again, internet and the law. But we have a couple of different ones, like state and justice throughout history, where we look at legal systems in civilizations like Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, discrimination at school, right to privacy, legal careers in the indigenous context, the rights of youth here and around the world, and the criminal legal system for teenagers. And then same principle for secondary cycle two. And the topics get a bit more complex, like intellectual property, bioethics here, legal careers, and then our two teaching guides on criminal trials. So that's it for the teaching guides. If I just go back to teachers, teaching tools, we also have high school workshops. That's where we can pair your class with a legal expert, like a lawyer or notary. They will come to your classroom, deliver a 60-minute presentation on a given topic. Like we have someone ready, set, invest, pick your side, bullying, what's your opinion, beat the buzzer, just to name a few examples, but you can feel free to browse through them yourself. And we have a bunch of other resources as well. So we have a page that's dedicated to CCQ resources for teachers. We have the advertisement for this workshop. And here we have an infographic that maps out the relevant CCQ concepts, CCQ legal concepts based on the grade level. So if I click secondary one, for example, we see identity and belonging, civic duty. If I click on civic duty, I get a description, and I have links for more information on Itzkiarwa content that can help us understand better, and teaching resources that are affiliated to this concept. Like this link is for a teaching guide for state and justice throughout history. And here is a recording of presentations that we gave. So training for how to teach the CCQ program, the legal aspects of the CCQ program. So this is part one, and part two, which you've had today, is going to be on this page as well. And then at the bottom, we have, again, other tools, texts for financial education to test your students on reading comprehension and for them to learn financial literacy. We have quizzes and we have teaching tools as well for adult education. So I'm not seeing any other questions, or if there are, I will stop the recording here and we can take the questions after.